I certainly, as a member of this Select Committee, commend this bill to the House.
Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. New Zealand First also supports the amended Fair Trading Soliciting on Behalf of Charities Amendment Bill, as it now is. The original bill clearly had some significant problems. It was, in particular, very complex, and it was difficult to work out how the various percentages would apply in various circumstances to organisations. I'm a member of a charitable trust board in Christchurch that exists exclusively for the purpose of raising money for other charities. And when I looked at the complexity of the original bill, I had to wonder where on earth we would fit in that particular regime. And I think that was one of the main problems with the bill as it originally was. And I think when some of the charitable organisations that exist in the community had looked at it, if it had been enacted as it was, then they would have had a lot of trouble working out where they fitted in and what their liabilities were. And that, Mr Speaker, of course means that it is bad law. And it would be bad law because it would not be readily understandable and people would not know what their liabilities were. And it's very important that there be clarity and certainty around laws of this kind, especially when we're dealing with charities. So it was that complexity, I think, that was the main problem with it, but it was also too inflexible, because any amendment would have had to come through the system of the whole House, and that would have been time-consuming and difficult. And there would have had to have been some flexibility to deal with that whole array of different charities with all their different needs and attributes that we find out there in the community. So I really do applaud the Commerce Committee for the current iteration of the bill, which provides for comprehensive regulation. I do think that's the way to go. And I note that there are 8 areas of regulation in the bill in section 28(1. And those include regulations for prescribing requirements for disclosure of information about the fundraiser, details about the charitable organisation itself, of course, and the relationship between those two parties, which of course can be very different in their nature. Also, the financial benefits the fundraiser would receive, directly or indirectly, from the process. The amount of the donation, of course, included in the price of goods, but also how the disclosure will take place and how the financial benefit must be calculated and expressed. And finally, the financial benefit that the fundraiser would not be required to disclose. If there are good regulations on all of those 8 subjects, then I think we will have a good and understandable regime for charities and their fundraisers to comply with. Now, Mr Speaker, all of this, of course, is fine and will provide for a good outcome. But I don't really believe that it's enough in itself. And in the future, I believe that what we really need is also some actual limitation about what can be deducted from charitable donations for expenses and for profits. And perhaps that could be done by way of guidelines, and that additional provision for other regulations along those lines could be made in the future. It's too late for that now, of course, but when the Fair Trading Act is revised, as it is intended to be shortly, then I would like to see some consideration given to that sort of concept. And the reason for that is the same as some other speakers have spoken about. It is to give people confidence that when they make a donation, most of it will actually go to the charity and rather than to profits or to expenses by those who collect them on behalf of charities. And when you think about the sophisticated ways that fundraising happens these days with online donations, automatic donations and all sorts of other methods, then it's very important that we have even more controls and regulations than we see in this particular bill. And that will give people the confidence that I spoke of. And, Mr Speaker, in making the regulations that are set out in this bill, great care will be needed to make sure that the needs of a great many different organisations are provided for. There are a whole array of different charities out there with different attributes and different needs. and it will therefore be very important indeed for the provision in the new section 28A2 for consultation to be comprehensively carried out, and it needs to be that outreaching sort of consultation rather than just waiting for people to come to the Minister or the Minister's representatives. That consultation will be absolutely vital if these regulations are actually going to work in practice. Lastly, Mr Speaker, I'd like to mention just this, that there are bound to be some issues with some of the definitions in the new section 28A5, and I'll mention a couple of them which I think we need to keep an eye on. The first is the term fundraiser, which is defined as being a person in business. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of my speech that I'm on a charitable trust board which exclusively raises funds for other charities. So I'm not quite sure whether that charity would be a person in business for the purposes of this regulation. We'll have to take a good look at that later on. Another term that I think we'll have to be careful about is the term makes requests. And I see that the term requests is defined in the bill as well. I think it should be wider, so as to simply include also unsolicited receipt of donations by just providing a facility for people to make donations rather than the definition that's just there at the moment. However, when, as I said before, the review of the Fair Trading Act does take place, we can look at whether these definitions have provided any challenges, and if so, we can refine them as we need to refine the regulations themselves when we take a good look at how it's proceeded. So I look forward not only to the passing of this bill, but later to the full review of the Fair Trading Act, and in particular the new provisions which we might put in it to refine and improve the provisions of this bill. But the bill as it is, Mr Speaker, I think is right in its direction in simply providing for a regime of regulations to be developed as a result of comprehensive consultation, and that is the key. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Kamaljeet Singh.